Hello and welcome back! I finally managed to complete this next video after a brief holiday break. In the previous episodes I've put together the main engine block, I did the rust weathering of the exhaust system, a ton of chipping on the main engine block and rear transmission, and at the end got to add the enamel grey wash to blend it all together. The results speak for themselves, and if you haven't already, feel free to go watch the previous two videos. If you enjoy the content of this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks to all that did in the past few weeks, it really helps and motivates me. We are off to this new video by finishing the engine block, so I don't have to think about it anymore. I am starting with one of the things I thought being extremely annoying and scary when I started doing scale model cars, which is the spark plugs cabling. In the previous video, I already had the holes on the spark plugs and the carburetor prepped before I did the weathering of the engine itself. This wasn't necessary, as it could have been done after, just so you know. Based on the experience in previous models I did, I found that dry fitting, as with many things in scale modelings, is the best way to have cabling that doesn't look too weird, or risking to have a cable that is too short compared to the others. The process goes like the following. I will start by roughly measuring each cable lengthwise, which is what you can see here. I will then strip off each cable at both ends by an nth of a millimeter, enough to slide them into the holes, and then bending them the way I like them, to fit on without issues. All of this before I start gluing them. I won't shy away from the fact that this process, for as much as it gives the best results, might also be extremely frustrating, as getting the cables to fit the way you want is not the easiest thing in the world. This is also one of the reasons why this is the only cabling that I did tolerate doing in this build. It's possible that with experience this might become easier to do, but for now it's a bit of a pain. Oh Madonna di Dio. Oh my God. Okay. At this point, after all this effort, I have all my cables ready to be glued. 5 for the spark plugs and 1 for the distributor. I am going to use some medium density super glue, which will allow me to pick a little bit of it at the end of each cable before placing them. This way I will avoid smearing the holes or clogging them in case I can get the cables into place as the first try, and as you can imagine, it will happen often.
A few moments later.
As I finished doing the cables off camera, I glued the petrol tank on the top of the engine, and now I decided to add a bit of weathering on it as well. I will be using the Fuel Stains enamel wash for this effect, which works well for both this and any additional gooey liquids, like accumulation of petrol in certain areas and spillages that look oily in general. I'm going to use it around the fuel cap and as well in some nooks and crannies below and around the engine block. Now that the engine block is done, I can move my attention to something that was bothering me for a while. As a tractor that was heavily used and sitting outside for months at a time, with all the chipping that we've seen, it really lacked a little bit of rust. I don't want to abuse it, but there are going to be signs of rust in some parts that are really exposed to elements where rain could have accumulated and let the rust sit in. As I said, it doesn't need to be a lot, but enough to show up on closer inspection. Lots of pictures that I have seen show how much this was normal on these tractors, and I suppose also due to the fact that zinc wasn't yet used to prevent rusting. For this, I will be using the enamel wash Streaking Rust Effects. This basically completes the weathering process for the engine block. I am not meant to touch this anymore, if not for adding the remaining parts to it. Once the enamels will dry, there will be little to no risk of smearing or removing them. This also means that I can finally move my attention away from the engine and concentrate on the next big part of the build: the wheels, the mudguards, the bonnet, that is the engine cover, and the metal seat. I started directly by applying the thin acrylic brown, specifically the Tamiya X9, using a cutout from a sponge glued on top of a stick for practicality. It took me a bit to realize that this was not how I was meant to be doing it. This is a major mistake you're witnessing right here. In case this is not clear, the mistake is on multiple levels. Usually I would have gone through the usual chipping process you have seen previously on the body. Some thin acrylic white applied with a sponge, followed by darker metal color application to highlight the exposed area and to finish it with the actual rust effect. I guess I wasn't thinking straight, or whatever, but at least in this part you can see how even such a blatant error can be recovered, if not enhanced. Surely at the expense of my mental sanity. I decide to move forward with this, effectively only avoiding applying it to the inner side of the wheels and the fenders. In some areas I even decide to reinforce it using a brush, joining some of the areas I am certain will be looking pretty rusty, or enhancing other areas that didn't show up as needed. I will keep the rusty areas as they are, and will go around them and use the chipping method to ensure I get the desired effect. In other words, making sure that there is still some scuffing on the paint using the thinned white and some exposed metal around where the rust has been showing. I was looking forward to work on the saddle. The effect is something I have seen multiple times in real life, and I tried to replicate it in the past. This is not just about chipping the paint away, but more like wearing it off until the metal is exposed. This high-intensity usage is something that is not exactly simple to replicate, and I hope to be able to get something as close as possible. Taking any opportunity possible to experiment is always a good option, not just a blind application of a boring technique. Finally, I reached the last step of the chipping process. As I did before, I am using the X10 gunmetal from Tamiya, which works very well and creates a nice contrast and shine through it. Not everything will be marked with it, but there are some areas, specifically on the fenders, that can help create a nice realistic effect. These areas close to the rear end of the truck are those that are going to be likely hit by debris and various other things that could damage the paint, the same as the front bottom of the tractor. As I get to work on the actual rust, I switch over to the animal wash. This way I will be able to manipulate it if I need to do so, like adding streaks and halos due to the rust dripping from the actual metallic area. Some photos I've seen of these tractors can get extremely beaten up and fall apart pretty badly. I will anyway avoid rusting up some areas as I was suggesting earlier, specifically those that are used frequently, like the seat and, as I suspect, the pedals. As with many inconsistencies in this kit, I am torn whether the wheels should have been assembled before weathering them or after, as the possibility to spill out and mess things up is very likely, as you can see. The possible alternative would have been to keep the inside and the outside of the rim as separate painted pieces without mounting the tire, weathering the whole thing and only after put them together. In hindsight, while the solution I chose might look messier, is probably the faster method, given the major mistake I also did. Now that I think of it, having done the initial acrylic brown base for the rust seems to have been a blessing, as creating these large areas with a wash might have been challenging. I wonder instead if using washes could have helped with texturing them properly, which is something that with acrylics I never managed to do. With all the rust wash applied, I can start blending it where needed, starting with the seat. I find amusing that the seat has a very primitive spring that dampens the rough terrain. All of the bottom part will likely be showing signs of rust, while the top part is meant to be actively used, so mostly exposed metal and very little signs of rust, preferably on the ridge of the seat. I will then follow up with wheels and fenders or mudguards, however you prefer to call them. As with the majority of the weathering process on scale models, the first pass is usually never enough. And in this case I am aware that applying washes only allow me to deposit some amount of color that I can manipulate at a later point with a thinner soaked brush. And when things get too much dimmed out, I can always pull out the wash again and reinforce the effect. Working with enamels is such a next level experience. Another example of how cool working with enamel is the following. I realized that the brush smeared the rust color way too much, to the point of leaving an overall orangey color across the whole wheel. Do not despair. A bit more enamel thinner and the game is still on. I tried my luck initially with a cotton bud, but I will end up reverting to a properly cleaned up brush to do the job properly. Now all the pieces are done, and I am extremely happy how they turned out. The rust effect lets the metal and dents show through it, while at the same time giving an old and worn look without looking too overly done. Thank you so much for sticking so far with me. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to get notified about future updates and releases. I will be seeing you soon for the next part, as finally, I can get to put things together. Ciao!